the government open to the idea of using shipping container homes to help alleviate the city's housing shortage. And the Privacy Commissioner slams the Education University for violating data security principles over security camera footage leak.
Good evening. A 7.1 magnitude earthquake rocked central Mexico, killing at least 248 people in several states and toppling buildings in heavily populated Mexico City. The major tremor struck on the 32nd anniversary of an earthquake that killed thousands. Alan Buckner reports.
Entire buildings came crashing to the ground when the earthquake struck. The powerful tremors had people running for their lives out of shaking buildings and onto the streets. It came just 2 hours after drills were held across Mexico to mark the date of the 1985 disaster. A mix of neighborhood volunteers, police, and firefighters used trained dogs and bare hands to search through the rubble for survivors. Dust-covered people, some barely conscious and seriously injured, were rescued from the collapsed buildings. One of the most desperate efforts was at a primary and secondary school in southern Mexico City, where a wing of a 3-story building collapsed into a mass of concrete floor slabs. More than 24 bodies were reported found, almost all of them children. The rescue was punctuated by cries of quiet, so searchers could listen for any faint calls of help. The searchers shored up the fallen concrete slabs with wooden beams so they wouldn't collapse further and crush whatever airspaces there were. President Enrique Peña Nieto released a video urging people to be calm. He said 40% of Mexico City was without power, as was 60% of nearby Morelos state. But he said the priority at the moment was to keep rescuing people who were still trapped and providing medical attention for the injured. He later visited the school where rescue efforts were underway. He said more than 24 people at the school were still missing. The quake's epicenter was about 120 kilometers southeast of Mexico City. Much of the city is built on a former lake bed, and the soil can amplify the effects of earthquakes centered hundreds of kilometers away. Alan Buckner, TVB News.
Hurricane Maria was a Category 5 storm when it tore up the Caribbean island of Dominica earlier this week and killed at least 2 people. Now Puerto Rico is bracing for a direct hit of what experts call the most catastrophic storm to hit the U.S. territory in a century. Sonia Artero reports.
Hurricane Maria's ferocious winds and lashing rain are already hitting Puerto Rico hard. The monster storm is now packing winds of 280 kilometers per hour. The governor of the U.S. territory told his people to brace for a life-threatening storm.
We have not experienced an event of this magnitude in our modern history. Although it looks like a direct hit with major damage to Puerto Rico is inevitable, I ask for America's prayers.
He instructed residents to evacuate to shelters as his government prepared for the worst.
My administration has done everything within our power to prepare for this event and to protect the lives of everyone in the island, including establishing over 500 shelters.
Puerto Rican residents heeded that warning by flocking to shelters to protect themselves from the second maximum strength storm to hit the Caribbean this month. The Dominican Republic stepped up preparations for Maria as it came under a hurricane warning advisory. The government quickly packed up emergency food supplies and trimmed back trees. Maria already wrecked the tiny island of Dominica with widespread devastation. The storm knocked out all communications, and 70% of homes lost their roofs. It also pounded the island of Guadeloupe, claiming at least 2 lives there. The French overseas territory of Martinique felt the impact but escaped largely unscathed. Since catastrophic storms are becoming commonplace in the Caribbean, British entrepreneur and philanthropist Sir Richard Branson is calling for a Marshall Plan of redevelopment.
Instead of bringing in normal generators, let's bring in the power generators. Let's make sure that we use this as an opportunity to start afresh and have a clean Caribbean.
Sonia Artero, TVB News.
U.S. President Donald Trump stunned delegates at the United Nations when he warned his country would totally destroy North Korea if it threatened to attack. In a hard-edged maiden speech to the UN General Assembly, Trump also mocked the North Korean leader as a rocket man for his repeated missile tests.
Delegates held their breath as U.S. President Donald Trump prepared to deliver his maiden speech to the UN General Assembly. And the controversial American leader laid it thick with more hostile rhetoric against North Korea. Trump stressed that Washington's patience with Pyongyang had almost run out, and that America was fed up with the constant missile launches and nuclear tests. He warned that if North Korea continued down its current path, it would reap a whirlwind of destruction.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
He urged the world's nations to unite to counter Pyongyang and warned America would put pressure on countries which continue to trade with North Korea.
It is an outrage that some nations would not only trade with such a regime, but would arm, supply, and financially support a country that imperils the world with nuclear conflict.
Trump even made an allusion to Kim Jong-un in his speech, apparently taking inspiration from an Elton John song and forming a nickname for the North Korean leader.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary.
North Korea wasn't the only thing Trump wanted to get off his chest. He called the 2015 deal to rein in Iran's nuclear program one-sided and an embarrassment to the United States. Trump also took aim at Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, blaming him and his government for crashing his country's economy and causing untold misery to its people.
The Venezuelan people are starving, and their country is collapsing. Their democratic institutions are being destroyed. This situation is completely unacceptable, and we cannot stand by and watch.
Also, Trump praised international efforts to destroy the Islamic State, while reminding the world of the crimes perpetrated by the Syrian government, including the use of poison gas against its own people.
In Washington, a Senate panel probing alleged Russian interference in the 2016 election abruptly cancelled an interview with President Donald Trump's personal lawyer. A swarm of reporters demanded answers from Michael Cohen as word surfaced that he had issued a statement about his testimony in violation of committee policy. However, Cohen was later asked to appear at an open hearing on October the 25th. Meantime, former U.S. Ambassador to China John Huntsman was grilled by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as President Trump's nominee to be ambassador to Russia. That's where the current Utah government was adamant Moscow did meddle in the 2016 U.S. election.
There is no question, underline no question, that the Russian government interfered in the U.S. election last year, and Moscow continues to meddle in the democratic processes of our friends and allies.
To local news now. After announcing details about a scheme providing transitional housing for the needy yesterday, the Hong Kong Council of Social Service isn't stopping there. Today, it also revealed a plan to rent out shipping container homes for the same purpose. And they've even already found land to do it. Winner Wong reports.
It's an idea that's been in talks for months. The Hong Kong Council of Social Service even sent a team to the Netherlands last year to observe how the country came to develop the world's largest container house village. These houses are put together using simple methods and provide basic facilities including water and power supplies, a bathroom, and cooking components. The council says at this stage, a developer has already agreed to rent out land to build Hong Kong's own cluster of shipping container homes for symbolic rent of $1. The land is expected to be about 7,000 square feet in area. It will host about 80 units ranging from 160 to 320 square feet and fit about 2 to 5 people each. The council hopes to have the houses up and running by next year, but first it will have to solve problems residents of these homes will face, such as the city's hot weather and typhoon safety. President of the Institute of Engineers Ira Chan says the problem of heat can be easily fixed with insulation boards, and as long as the containers are stacked no more than 2 units high, typhoons should not pose too much of a threat to them. Secretary for Development Michael Wong says the government holds an open attitude towards new ideas. But he also said if the city has land to spare, authorities need to consider whether it's better to use them for temporary or permanent housing. He also did not say whether Carrie Lam's maiden policy address to be delivered next month will touch on the topic. Winna Wong, TVB News.
And to cope with the city's housing crisis, owners of hundreds of properties have stepped forward to offer their idle homes to rent out at a low price to people in need. As Rachel Leung reports, priority will be given to those living in poor conditions, such as under rooftops and subdivided flats.
The first batch of shared flats will come from this 30-year-old building in Kowloon City. 20 units will be available for use by the end of the year, ranging from 250 to 300 square feet. Its developer Henderson Land rented it out to local charity Lok Sin Tong for 2 years for a symbolic $1 per month. So who will be eligible? Those that qualify would have been waiting for public housing for at least 3 years already and are currently living in homes that are unsuitable, like subdivided flats, as well as having a low income. The charity says while there are many families who are in need of transition housing, priority will be given to people living in severe conditions. Chief Executive of the NGO, Alice Lau, said Lok Sin Tong will also conduct visits to understand the living needs of applicants. The charity has recently visited tenants living under rooftops and subdivided flats. As far as how the flats will be allocated, Lok Sin Tong says that would depend on individuals' needs, rather than leaving it up to the draw. The elderly or the handicapped are likely to be given a unit on the bottom floors. The building will be utilized to its fullest. Even the ground floors will be renovated to serve as community centers to provide job training. The development chief today also appealed to property owners to collaborate in the flat sharing scheme so those in need can benefit. Rachel Leung, TVB News.
The fallout from a banner posted at the Education University of Hong Kong mocking a grieving government official continues. The Privacy Commissioner today waded into the controversy, saying that photos circulated of 2 men suspected of putting up the poster violated data protection principles. The Education University had asked the media to stop circulating leaked security camera images of 2 young men putting up a banner on the campus's democracy wall that congratulated the Undersecretary for Education on the death of her son on September the 7th. The institution also reported the leak to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data. The Privacy Watchdog today said its investigation found that someone at the university's security centre had taken mobile phone photos of the closed-circuit television footage and sent them to a WhatsApp group. Those in the group then forwarded it to 13 staff members and at least 1 student. It noted that the photo was sent to find out if anybody recognised the 2 men. The Privacy Commissioner said the university had the right to take photos for a disciplinary probe, but where it failed was that it didn't stress that the photos were confidential, should not be shared and must be deleted after being seen. The Privacy Commissioner said the university had breached data security principles by not adequately preventing the unauthorised use of the images and protecting the privacy of those in them. For its part, the university said it accepted the findings and would follow the watchdog's recommendations on keeping personal information private. Still ahead in the news. British police make more arrests in connection with last week's London train bombing. Hamas invites the Palestinian president to... Welcome back. British police arrested 3 men in South Wales in connection with last week's bombing of a crowded commuter train in West London. 5 people are being questioned by detectives over the attack, which left 30 people injured. Police say a 25-year-old man was arrested last evening in Newport, while 2 others were detained at another address in the Welsh town early this morning. The homemade bomb went off last Friday during the morning rush hour on a packed train at Parsons Green station of the London Underground. Flames erupted from the device, although it appeared that it did not fully explode.
Hamas has invited Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to send officials to Gaza to resume control of the coastal enclave the Islamic militant group seized a decade ago. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh said his group is serious about returning power to the Western-backed Palestinian leader. Hamas has said it will dismantle a contentious committee that has governed Gaza in recent months. That answers a key Abbas demand. Haniyeh also said Hamas is ready to hand over all government functions to Abbas and to hold elections in Gaza and in the West Bank. Hamas is in financial and political distress after years of an Israeli-Egyptian blockade, as well as recent economic pressure from Abbas.
A Russian military helicopter gunship accidentally fired on spectators during a war games exercise in western Russia, injuring several people. The Russian military acknowledged that a helicopter accidentally fired a rocket during the exercise, but insisted that no one was hurt. The video released online showed a pair of helicopter gunships sweeping low, with one of them firing a rocket that explodes next to a spectator in a parking lot. Local media said 2 people were seriously wounded and 2 vehicles were destroyed in the incident.
Chris Patten, the last British governor of Hong Kong, says Beijing should not see talks on democracy as an act of subversion. While reiterating his disapproval of calls for Hong Kong independence, Patten says Chief Executive Carrie Lam should persuade the Chinese president not to treat locals as dissidents. Elmi Lung reports.
When Chris Patten made a speech on shaping a better future, he inevitably touched on local youths, including student leaders like Lester Sham, Billy Fong and Joshua Wong.
Joshua Wong and his colleagues are as effective and principled as any young people I've ever met. I think that they will in future come to welcome the fact that they've been turned into international martyrs by what's happened to them. Nobody should underestimate the effect on the rest of the world, alas, not China, because people weren't shown what was going on, of those extremely, on the whole, extremely peaceful demonstrations.
The former governor went on to describe Chief Executive Carrie Lam's job as extremely difficult.
I hope she'll make clear to the local liaison office that it shouldn't interfere as much in Hong Kong's affairs. I hope that she'll make it clear to Beijing that talking about democracy in Hong Kong isn't an act of subversion. I hope that she will be able to persuade President Xi that he shouldn't treat Hong Kong as though people in Hong Kong were just another group of dissidents out to create trouble.
But how would he have handled the Occupy protests if he was in charge?
I can barely remember a few hundred people protesting about anything when the colonial oppressor was here.
Patten is primarily here to promote his new book and will speak at 2 other events tomorrow before leaving Hong Kong.